Welcome back to Traveling Dice. I'm Jason. I've got another top 10 list for you today. The top 10 traits of a great opponent. Warhammer is an amazing game. It's a game that I've played for close to 30 years and I love it. But if there's one thing that can ruin a good game of Warhammer, it's a lousy opponent. And let's be honest, we all know that guy. Now, when I say that guy, if you don't know what I'm talking about, brace yourself because it's possible you might be that guy. But don't worry, this list is going to help you out.
Honorable mention, plays at a good pace.
Really, a game of Warhammer has a good pace to it, right? It should have an ebb and a flow. Now, yes, you want to be thoughtful. Yes, you want to think your moves through. Don't rush yourself. But at the same time, don't agonize over every single decision, right? Don't just sit there and think for long periods of time. And ideally, if you're a really good player, you start thinking about what you're going to do on your turn during your opponent's turn. Now, granted, this isn't always possible, right? You want to be paying attention to their dice rolls. You want to be looking at what they're doing. But as your opponent's moving, the movement phase is a great time for this. As your opponent is moving, you should already be looking at their moves and thinking about how you're going to counter them. And granted, something might happen in magic phase that's going to change your plan, or the shooting phase, or your opponent's close combat phase. But you already should have kind of a plan in mind, or to have some options in mind. At the same time, you don't want to be going too fast. This isn't as much of an issue in my opinion. It seems to rarely come up, but when it comes up, it is jarring. If you're moving around too quickly, you're doing everything super fast in a way that doesn't feel organic either. You want to have that nice, even pace to the game, but definitely the one that seems most common is playing too slow.
Number 10, doesn't claim certainty of every rule.
Warhammer is a game that has a lot of rules. And there's nothing that's more strikingly annoying than having an opponent that acts as though they know every single rule, pat, verbatim, word for word, and they express this knowledge with absolute certainty. In fact, sometimes opponents will express this knowledge with so much confidence that you start to believe them. But then a rule will come up and they say what they know the rule to be, and you know that they're wrong, right? So you go and look it up and you realize they're wrong, you show them that they're wrong, and then you start to wonder, were they wrong about all those other rules that they claim to be so confident about? Now, granted, there are some players that know the rules exceptionally well. And if you're one of those players and you want to be a great opponent, I think you approach it like this. I think the rule is this, I'm pretty confident, but we can look it up. That's a great way to approach it. And then you show them that you're right, and most likely they'll go with you on the next time. But pausing to look up a rule is okay, but never, even if you know you're right, you should never claim 100% certainty. Just say, I'm pretty confident, feel free to look it up.
Number 9, handles rule disputes well.
Going back to the fact that there are a lot of rules in Warhammer, unfortunately, some situations still aren't covered by the rules or aren't covered clearly. Rule disputes come up. If you want to be a great opponent, you'll handle these situations well, right? A rule dispute comes up, you should listen to what your opponent is saying. Even if you think they're wrong, especially if you think they're wrong, right? Listen to what they're saying, listen to why they think that the rules should work this way. Then state your case, right? If you cannot find it clearly addressed in the rule book, then you have to resolve it in a certain way. The best way to resolve it in these instances is to roll a d6, right? 1, 2, 3, it works the way that I'm suggesting it should work. 4, 5, 6, it works the way you're suggesting it should work. This is, in my experience, the way these kinds of things are historically settled. Now, there's a caveat to this. You have to go with the result, and you have to immediately move on, even if you feel like it wasn't quite fair or wasn't quite right. If the die goes against you in that instance and you agree to d6 it, you go with it. You don't complain, you move on. It's a sign of a great opponent.
Number 8, explains clearly what is in their army.
You want to be a great opponent, you absolutely have to make it clear what's in your army. There should be no surprises, right? If the unit of Iron Guts has the flaming banner, your opponent should not be made aware of that after they charge it with their trolls, for example. Oh, by the way, I've got the flaming banner, you're totally going to get crushed in this combat. Your opponent should be very knowledgeable that, hey, when I deploy this unit, I look at them, this unit has the flaming banner, all right? They are very clear. Also, ideally, you're modeling things as they are, and if something isn't as it appears, right? So if your halberds in this battle are actually wielding great weapons, I'm not totally opposed to that idea because models expensive and sometimes they're hard to do conversions. But you have to make it clear. You remind your opponent, I want to make sure you know these guys have great weapons. So absolutely, everything in your list should be very clear where your characters are, what they do. If your opponent has questions, answer the questions clearly. They should know how your army operates. Now, a great player probably already knows how your army operates, but there are a lot of armies and there are a lot of rules, and some armies come up more often than others. If you're a Bretonnian player, this might be the first time that your opponent's playing Bretonnian, right? It's, at least in my experience, not a particularly common army. You need to be able to make it clear what's in your list, how things operate, and do that fairly concisely in a very clear manner if you want to be a great opponent.
Number 7, pauses between to hit and to wound rolls. So pausing between your to hit and your to wound rolls is really important because it's giving your opponent an opportunity just to verify that the rolls are good, right? That you didn't accidentally leave in a miss and that's now going to the to wound rolls. So let's say I have 6 attacks, right? I need 4 to hit. I remove my misses, and all I do is I pause, let my opponent glance at that before I move on. It doesn't have to be a long pause, but just, you don't want it to be immediately I pick them up, right? So sometimes I'll even glance up at my opponent to see that they've seen it, but this usually kind of starts to develop or more organically as time goes on. Just a quick pause, your opponent gets to see it. What you want to avoid is something like this. 6 attacks, 4 to hit. And then your opponent says, oh, I think you had a 3 in there. Right, so I grab my misses first, then I grab my hits, and I'm about to roll to wound. My opponent now says, oh, you had a 3 in there. Now, I feel very confident that I didn't have a 3 in there, right? I know it was a 4 and 2 6s. I actually don't remember now, but I think they were all 4 pluses. I feel pretty confident. But the problem is, because I didn't pause, there's no way of really confirming it with my opponent. And in a situation where we both feel certain, one of us is going to feel a little cheated here. So a brief pause before you move on to the 2 wound rolls is a great way to be an awesome opponent. Number 6, has dice that are easily seen. A great opponent will have dice that are easily seen and easily read from across the table. So I have a pile of dice here that I consider to be bad dice. And they're in my collection because, I don't know, it feels weird to throw dice away, but I would never use these dice. In fact, I was playing a game with my son and he started rolling this die and I tossed it off the table and I said, get this out of here, right? This die is probably the worst offender. I cannot read this die unless I'm right on top of it. And I don't know, in the video, can you even tell what that is? Right, it's hard to tell. It's translucent, it's kind of clear white on white pips. Horrible. Horrible, horrible. Your opponent should not struggle to see your die roll. If you see your opponent leaning over, if you see your opponent struggling to read your die, I would swap it out and I would use different dice. So what you want is you want a dice that has a lot of contrast between the body of the die and the pip. Easily read. So this is not great. It is, you kind of got too much going on here. It's dark on dark in some areas. This 5 is very hard to read. The blue pip there, or excuse me, the blue and the black pip, they blend in very, very well together. And it has this camouflage effect. Translucent dice, in my opinion, oftentimes aren't the best. These are hard to read. Even these, the contrast between the colors is not great enough, in my opinion. Right? It's dark on dark. I like dark and light, right? So either dark pips, light die, or light pips, dark die. So these I would consider bad. These I think are great examples of very good dice. Okay, you have a nice contrast. They're easily seen from across the table. You have a combination of either dark pips and a light die, or light pips with a dark die. These are all easily read. These are not. So a great opponent will consider this when choosing their dice and go with dice that your opponent will not have a hard time seeing. Number 5, measures accurately. So the movement phase is all about measurement, right? You're going to be using a tape measure. And using this tape measure accurately is really important if you want to be a great opponent. Now, there's a few common things that I see on occasion or have seen on occasion that, kind of make your eyebrow go up a little bit. Now, nobody in my Warhammer group, of course, is guilty of this. But when you're measuring, sometimes you'll see an opponent, right? And they lay it out and they start moving the unit. And you'll also see them kind of move the tape measure a little bit, which means the tip of the tape measure ends up being further than it really should be, right? So that, and I'm not saying that this is done deliberately, but it's just kind of a careless maneuver that I have seen on occasion. The other thing that's really critical is wheeling, right? So when you're wheeling, the front corner of your unit should not be moving, right? Only the one side. And and it's kind of difficult to measure wheeling because you're using a straight object to measure essentially what's a curved movement. So it's hard to be 100% precise. But while you're doing this, the entire unit should not be moving forward, right? You have one corner that's pivoting and one that's moving, and you're measuring as best you can that curve. But this side here would not be moving. On occasion, you'll see someone, and as they're wheeling, you see that they're also moving the unit forward. It's not accurate measurement, and it's not a way to be a great opponent. Lastly, in 8th edition allows for backwards movement and sideways movement. You can do this at half your movement, but you cannot wheel and you cannot reposition. So according to 8th edition rules, you're going directly sideways, half your move, Savage Rock to move 4 inches, so I'd be able to move 2 inches directly sideways. Or I would be able to move 2 inches directly back. On occasion, you'll see someone doing a maneuver like this, and in addition to the movement, they do a slight wheel. This is a big no-no, and it's not supported by the rules. And it can have a dramatic impact on the game. So you want to be a great opponent, you be mindful of these movement restrictions, and you measure accurately. Number 4, handles bad luck with grace.
There's a certain amount of skill and tactics involved in playing Warhammer Fantasy. It's part of what makes the game great. But there is also an element of luck, right? We're rolling dice. You're rolling dice to do essentially everything in the game, which means luck plays a component. Now, you as a great player can mitigate that luck, but you can never eliminate it entirely. So there will be instances, there will be games, there will be battles of Warhammer Fantasy where Lady Luck just doesn't go your way. Or your opponent is just on fire with luck, right? They're making every die roll. Now, if you want to be a great opponent, you have to handle these situations with grace. When you're getting a bad beat, the dice are just against you, don't get mad, don't throw a fit, don't go on a diatribe about the odds of what just happening. Like if you need 4s to hit and you roll 20 dice and you only hit with 3, don't go on a soliloquy about how improbable that was. Just take it with grace, laugh with your opponent. Your opponent's having a great time, you can tell the story at the bar later on, but in the middle of the battle, and definitely never in an angry way, right? It's frustrating when the dice go against us that much, and I get it, but you gotta pause. You wanna be a great opponent. You wanna make sure that your opponent's having a great time. Take those situations with grace. Lady Luck will swing back your way as soon as you know it. But bad beats, accept them, move on, don't get angry, have a good time.
Number 3, considers list composition.
The battle really starts with a piece of paper and a pencil. At least that's how it does for me. I'm old school like that, all right? Making your list. Making your list is fun, right? So there's times where I just make lists just to make lists. I'm not even gonna play. But a great opponent really considers their list. And yeah, you want a competitive list. You want your list to do well. You want it to be able to maneuver. You want it to have powerful things. You want it to have combat threats and range threats and all these various things. But a great opponent also pauses and considers, what is it going to be like to play against this army that I'm putting on paper right now? What is it going to be like to play against that army? Is it a gun line? gun lines run the risk of being boring to play against, right? Either I get across to you and I'm gonna win, or I'm just gonna get shot moving my guys across the battlefield. So things like gun lines, things like I'm avoiding you at all costs and I'm dancing around as I'm pew-pewing you and magicking you, and I'm avoiding you at all costs, and if I'm successful, it means you're never gonna get in combat with me while I shoot you and have a great time. It can be effective, but it's not what a great opponent does, in my opinion. You wanna consider, what kind of game am I creating with this list? Is it a balanced list? Is it over the top? Is it just taking every single good option and just min-maxing everything and being a beat stick, or playing the game in a way that's avoiding my opponent or simply shooting at them? These types of things you want to avoid if you're going to be a great opponent.
Number 2, picks up their misses. A great opponent will always remove their misses and their failed to wound rolls rather than removing their successes. Now, it might seem natural, right? Say I have 10 attacks and I need 4s to hit. So it might make sense that because my successes are what I'm going to be rolling again to wound, that I would pick them up so that I have them in my hand for the to wound roll, and then brush aside my misses, and then I would roll to wound. Now, while that might be a more efficient use of movement, it is not very sportsmanlike, because when you pick up your failed to hit rolls, let's say again, I need 4s to hit. So I rolled a hit. If I make an error and I'm picking up my successes, that error is in my favor. So let's say I'm picking up my successful to hit rolls, and for some reason I glance at this 3 and I think it's a 4. Whatever, like bad glare, I'm getting old and bald and my eyes are tired, or it's just been a long night, one too many beers, whatever the case may be, right? I see this and I think it's a 4. And let's say I'm grabbing my successful hits and I pick them up. That mistake that I just made is in my favor and it's going against my opponent. So if you do the opposite, right, in this scenario, I'm picking up my failed to hit rolls. And let's say I make an error, right? And for whatever reason, I see this 4 and I think it's a 3. Now I'm picking up my failures. This mistake that I'm making is in my opponent's favor. So you want to do this so that if you make an error, it's not in your favor. That is the sportsman way to do it. Now, oftentimes your opponent is paying attention and they might point out, oh, you picked up a successful to hit, add it back in. Great. But if the error goes uncaught, it should never be in your favor. It should always be in your opponent's. And the only way to do that while rolling is to pick up your failed to hit and your failed to wound rolls. Never pick up your successes. Your successes get left out, your opponent sees them, and then you pick them up to roll for the next step. Number 1, has fun.
Whether you're at a tournament or you're in the garage or you're playing with your best friend, you're playing with a stranger, the most important thing you can do as a great opponent is have fun, right? Warhammer is supposed to be fun, right? It's competitive, but it's not the Super Bowl, guys. Just relax, have fun. If you're going into it and your opponent needs snake eyes, you should be screaming along with them like, oh, that was an amazing roll. Smile, greet people, socialize, interact, engage with them, comment to each other, wow, that was a really incredible roll, or that was a great maneuver on your part, nice counter. Have a good time, have fun. Don't take this so seriously. Yes, we want to win. Yes, we want to perform well, especially at a tournament and things like this, but not at the sacrifice of having fun. Have fun. If you're having fun, chances are your opponent's having fun. Chances are most of the things on this list are things that you're doing already, but if not, you might consider adding them to their repertoire. If you enjoyed this list, please consider liking and subscribing. Bye for now.